going on, guys? MutantCowboy here. Today I want to talk about the upcoming DLC with Season 4. Now, of course, there's a lot of speculation and this is still a long ways off, but as we all know, The Division, when it's good, we can play it for hours, right? I mean, many of us have thousands of hours in the game. But of course, when it's been around for 4 years now, I mean, many of us are just kind of on empty with the game. And what I'm really hoping is that this time with Season 4, they can bring this whole thing around. They can really reinvigorate some of the interest in the game and really just bring back the community and finally start putting things into the Division that we all have seen the need for. So let's take a dive into some of the past and hopefully what the future holds for the Division 2. Now, as many of you have already seen, and I've showed on a couple of the videos, the Year 5 roadmap. We've got Broken Wings, Puppeteers, Vanguard, and Black Diamond. Of course, Season 1, 2, 3, and 4. We know Descent mode. We know a little bit about the Incursion. We know Season 3 is going to be mostly story going back to New York. But Season 4 is, of course, the biggest interest so far. What are they hiding in there? What kind of things are they actually going to bring that they're not telling us about? Is it possible that the specialization rework might show its head around this time? A lot of that stuff is in the air. And of course, we've got a year till this basically gets released. Probably sometime in, February or March of 2024. But the thing that has a lot of people talking is, of course, the picture here. Obviously, this is the Brooklyn Bridge, and if anyone's not familiar with the Division, Brooklyn kind of has a bit of a history with the Division. Now, I know a lot of people are like, well, it doesn't mean anything. It's not really, guaranteed. This doesn't imply Brooklyn. It's just a bridge, whatever. It could be used for whatever purpose. And, of course, that is true to some degree. I agree that, there's no guarantee that this implies we are going back to Brooklyn or, anything like that. But I do find it to be highly likely. And we'll talk about why I find the Brooklyn aspect to be likely. Alright, so looking at this roadmap, which was, as many of you may remember, this is Season 3, 4, this is basically the ending of the Division 2. This was like the last thing they were supposed to really put out. Of course, Season 3, that was Brenner. Yes, he's the pictured person here, and that's what the, season covered. We had the Summit, of course, a tower. That's basically what we did in Summit. It wasn't hiding anything. It's telling us pretty much what we're doing. Again, Season 4, same thing, Fei Lao. That's what we covered in Season 4. And that's who's pictured here. Now, of course, the unreleased special event, which was codenamed Nightmare, which everyone, I'm not sure how exactly this was talked about, but I'm pretty sure this was supposed to be something at Kinley College. I think that's what's depicted here. I can't really tell. It's either a mausoleum or Kinley College. I don't really know. I've only played through Kinley College like once, so I don't really recognize the buildings. But anyway, pretty reasonable assumption this was something in the game that they were just going to add this event to, right? So while this may be a gray area, I think these three speak pretty highly of the likelihood of what's being pictured is going to be what's represented in the actual content. Of course, we can also look at, the previous roadmap that they gave us, which was Season 10. Of course, they got the babyface thing, Winter Holidays. They've got the Chill Out mask here, which is pretty much one of the most popular items for the holiday event and one of the best masks in the game that, it brings a lot of diversity because of the 2 mod slots. It's a great mask. So it's featured here and we know what it is. Of course, Season 11, we know that, the stovepipe thing, but what's featured here is the whole castle settlement, and we know that this is going to be a process throughout Year 5 as well, rebuilding the castle settlement. But this kind of hints at the beginning of that process. And then the thing that a lot of people speculated on back in the day, which was the Year 5 little teaser here, but, some people noticed, of course, the green shade icon there, or, the Isaac icon, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, at the time, nobody really knew what it meant. But, looking back on it, we all know that, okay, this right here was referring to the Descent game mode, right? That's what this implied. And of course, that's kind of tied into the whole NSA, Splinter Cell, Sam Fisher kind of thing. But yeah, these pictures accurately depict what's going on. So let's, again, look at the first the roadmap that we have for year 5. Again, Descent depiction, gotcha. We know Puppeteers is going to be incursion based at the Meret Estate, and of course, to me, this looks like a mansion on fire. And of course, we all know the Cleaners, which are going to be the faction here, are a fire-based faction. So this does kind of indicate to me something to do with Cleaners and the Meret Estate. Yeah, I mean, it's not like it's some sort of sneaky thing that they're trying to pull off here. It seems, pretty as it is, right? And then Vanguard. We know this is based around the story of Aaron Keener and what was going on with Aaron Keener behind the scenes, while we were fighting him and fighting, the other factions in the WONY expansion. Now, of course, obviously Statue of Liberty is a great depiction of New York itself, but it's also the location where we took down Aaron Keener. So it is kind of a, all-in-one thing here where we're describing Aaron Keener and we're describing where we took him down. So kind of a little bit of foreshadowing of what happened during that whole process and what is going on behind the scenes. So then, looking at, again, the obvious, we've got the Brooklyn Bridge here. I mean, it's either some sort of special bridge-related content, which, I mean, seems a little bit funny. And, of course, there's, some other circumstances with the bridge that I think we need to go into in here in a second. But I think this is a pretty good way of depicting, at least, in a slightly obvious but not like overt way, that, hey, we're going back to Brooklyn. Now, again, it could be a completely different thing. Maybe there is some sort of content around this area that they're going to be going off of. But if you've played the WONY expansion and you look at the map, this bridge is fairly in the middle of the map. So it's not like it's saying or hinting at a new area on the Manhattan side that we're basically just going to be, opening up an area right by this bridge, because the only area that would really make sense would be, again, the area that this leads to, which is Brooklyn. And now look, if you had any actual doubts, this is Google Maps right here. This is the Brooklyn Bridge. This is pretty much the exact spot. You can see the, the street lamp and everything. Obviously, I'm in Google Maps, so I can't get over to the sidewalk to show you guys exactly where it's at. But, I mean, if I was standing over here and had that angle on the bridge, yeah, I could pretty much, basically just make that exact photo. Looking at this actual thing from a overview, we do know that this is where the Brooklyn Bridge is. This is basically where that photo is taken from. So it's like right here. And you're looking at the FDR drive, and you're, of course, you got the bridge. Looking over, where does that bridge lead to? Of course, it leads to the Brooklyn area. Not a huge complication there. But let's look real quick at something that I think matters, is very important to the actual game and just where we are and why players are kind of annoyed with the franchise in general and everything, right? If we go back and we actually look, the Division has not had many map expansions. I mean, since 2016, right, 7 years now, the game has expanded very little. Yeah, they put in some modes and stuff like that, but the thing that players are constantly after, especially with this live service stuff, is more of what they've been doing. They want to continue on with their character. They want to explore more of the map. All these areas that, are kind of blocked off, players want that. The first expansion that we actually got was in 2017. It was basically a little bit less than a year after the Division launched. And this was update 1.6 with Last Stand. And this map expansion was only DZs 7, 8, and 9. So this was basically only a DZ expansion, and that DZ expansion mainly existed so they can kind of get some more area for the Last Stand game mode. But this really didn't scratch the itch of anyone who was into the actual PvE of the game. And this was, a maybe a bad move. I don't really know. I like Last Stand, but I know a lot of players didn't like the PvP emphasis of Division 1. They didn't like the idea that PvP was the only intended like end game for the actual game, and that upset players. And this being like the only major expansion of the game to increase the map size kind of made people mad. Going a little bit further with update 1.8, which was basically at the end of the game's life cycle. I mean, they had updates 8.1, 8.2, and 8.3, which were kind of like, we're just doing some balancing. But by this point, pretty much, like, they released this and the game was gone. Like, this was the last thing and everyone left. Pretty much the truth. And this released basically at the end of 2017. So it was, like almost a year and some change later is when Division 2 came out. And that was kind of like a big slap in the face. Everyone knew, like they abandoned Division 1. They barely put any effort into the PvE area. And that made a whole bunch of players mad. And this Resistance expansion, or I guess update, whatever you want to call it, was the last like hurrah of the game, so to speak. And this is when they added the whole West Side Piers thing. And it was an okay mode, or an okay zone, I should say. It was basically just like two smaller areas that really didn't have the same feel as the Division 1 stuff, but they had kind of their own reasons. But as we, kind of came to learn, this was like a test bed for the Division 2 PvE. You had just a bunch of different gimmicks that weren't in the normal Division 1 game. For example, it was kind of like enemies would just come out of nowhere and surround you and piss you the hell off the entire time you were in there. Like, you just kept getting harassed. Like, if you tried to explore this area, it was just annoying. Like, I hated it. They would also have, like, the occasional, like, floating objective that would pop up, and you'd have to go do that. And that was kind of reminiscent of what they were trying to accomplish in Division 2 with how they did their, not the, like the landmarks, but their, like, open world events and stuff like that, where they would pop up and you'd, go rush and do them. But, of course, it was a little bit of a different system, but they were just testing out stuff. The main thing with this mode was really the whole resistance mode and skirmish mode. Resistance was, like almost like a zombies mode from Call of Duty, and it was a poor version of zombies from Call of Duty. But basically, you'd survive as many waves as you could and get loot. Of course, the skirmish mode was pretty much my favorite thing. I loved skirmish because it was probably just the best PvP in my opinion at the time. And in this game, the Dark Zone had gotten stale and boring, and I hated the new Rogue 2.0, and yeah, I wasn't really too much of a fan of the Dark Zone at this time, and there was no real gear to get, so I really didn't care about getting the gear in the Dark Zone. I mean, I could just do I think they had the global events or whatever at this time, so I mean, it's like either doing global events or just going to skirmish. That's basically all I did. So yeah, I didn't care about Rogue 2.0 anymore. But yeah, these were the only two Division 2 or Division 1 map expansions that happened. Right, this one was fairly small at the very end of the game. First one, again, was just for the Dark Zone, and that's it. Of course, now we jump into Division 2, and I would say the second map expansion that didn't include PvP. If you included PvP, it would be technically the third expansion in 7 years, which was big. It was large. It was a very good expansion, and I actually liked the expansion. Only thing I didn't like was Gear 2.0, but I don't really blame WONY for Gear 2.0. Gear 2.0 happened before WONY, so when I think about WONY, I don't include Gear 2.0. I just think about the good amount of content and stuff to do that they added with the game. And it, did add a large refresh to the game and made it, more interesting. There was something, to go and do and to replay. That wasn't just the same missions that we had been doing for the last year. Of course, now it's, it's the same old. It's still, a pretty old, thing to do. I mean, it's almost 3 years old now. So it's not like it's fresh to redo this stuff. But at the time, again, this was great content. Where does all of this stuff lead us to? Finally, we get a map expansion, which is great. We're kind of hoping that this is going to be in Brooklyn. At least that's, what the signs are pointing to. But this kind of brings up some stuff from Division 1 that I want to get into. Now, of course, look, if you're one of the Division old hats and you remember the launch times of Division 1, maybe that first year when it's like, where's the content at? Why aren't they adding more content? Where's the, PvE stuff? Of course, you got into year 2 and you're still like, where's this content at? And, by that time, a lot of people were like, why aren't they just adding some of the stuff that they don't, use? Why can't we go back to Brooklyn? Why can't they add stuff to Brooklyn that makes at least takes use of that space that we don't use anymore? And, for those of you who don't remember, in Division 1, Brooklyn was actually a starting area. So it was kind of the way that you got introduced to the mechanics. And a lot of people actually struggled through it because at launch, Division 1 was difficult. It was challenging. It was fun. And it was a struggle for a lot of players to get to that starting area, especially if they weren't, actually approaching it like a Division game. A lot of players who jumped into the Division thought it was going to be just like a shooter and you could just run through and do anything. And that's obviously not the game that it was. And it's not the game that it is currently. I mean, even though they've tried to go in that direction. But back at launch, it was even more obvious that this game was an RPG and you needed to use cover. You needed to, to play, somewhat tactically. And of course, you just needed to try to take advantage of any of the mistakes that the AI was making. But when you're new to the game, you don't really have like the skills unlocked. You don't have, a variety of weapons. It was rough. Okay. I'm not going to lie that it was like just, easy or something. I understand. Like I had a little bit of difficulty getting past the start area, but it wasn't as bad as a lot of people complained it to be, but it was still probably a little bit more difficult than many people have ever experienced in a starting area. Now, that area, once you get past it, is completely forgotten and ignored. And it really doesn't have anything to do with anything. Even though one of the biggest selling points for the game was the fact that Brooklyn and most of Manhattan were featured at the very end of their, E3 2013 trailer. This was the area that, is kind of like the heart of it all. You were going to, be surrounded by dark zones, be surrounded by a bunch of other players, completing objectives and doing stuff. It was this whole open world, like live map type thing with tons of stuff to do. You could be all over the place. And that looked fantastic and it was exciting. Of course, when the game launched, again, we didn't really get too much of that. It was a very cut down, condensed version. But of course, looking at it, looking back at it, why didn't they include Brooklyn? Why didn't they remaster that content and make, maybe 2 or 3 new missions to go back and do, or just something back there and, giving us something to do? That was kind of my biggest complaint with that whole situation. They had this area that they could have reused, but they never did. And of course, they had other content. I think they had some content for Central Park that they just never did. And the content that they did release with West Side Piers was actually content that might have been intended for the launch of the game, because, that was actually stuff to do with like LMB, I think it was like the aircraft carrier there, or, there's a ship there. I forget what. But that ship was a mission or something like that originally. It got cut out. Anyway, the whole point is obviously a lot of that stuff was stuff that was never finished or cut out, and just, it was disappointing for a lot of players. Well, again, we're looking at this whole Division 2 thing. Where are we going? If it is Brooklyn, that's great. Hopefully they can reinvigorate some of the interest in the game with this. But I guess the thing that I'm, most worried about is, are they actually going to get it right? Are they going to make this feel like something new and interesting and good? Because I think at the heart of it, that is the biggest problem with Division 2. They bolt on content that doesn't really have any meaning for the player. It doesn't really have that depth that we want. And it feels kind of like a desperation move or like a money grab that doesn't feel good. It's not pleasant when it feels like everything in the game is just kind of like an afterthought, and it basically just ruins your desire to keep playing because you don't feel connected to the world. Well, here's the problem with going back to Brooklyn. It's a minor problem, but it is still a problem. Obviously, we all know, or I guess if you've done Warlords of New York and you've actually looked around a little bit, that the Brooklyn Bridge is gone. It's destroyed. So we're not going to be crossing that bridge. So my question or concern becomes, is this actually going to be like an explorable, new area that's connected to the rest of New York? Or is this going to be another detached area that you can only get to if you travel to it on the map, meaning there's no real connection to anything else. And that's kind of another thing that I hate about the game. Warlords of New York is great, but the fact that it's not actually connected to the main area of the game is annoying, right? I don't want to constantly fast travel between different maps and stuff like that, and it feels disjointed and doesn't really feel as cohesive as I guess I would like. I mean, it feels more like Destiny than The Division. And if this is just yet another area, this is going to be like another moon in Destiny? They're just adding a moon, or they're adding an asteroid, or, a spaceship, and, like that you fast travel to. That, I don't like that. Yeah, I mean, it's not as interesting as just having a big world that you can go run from one end to the other. That seems a lot more fun to me. I mean, just having the connection, the cohesiveness there. Now, so if they're making this a third area, but the smallest of the three, again, we're kind of like, it feels like a West Side Pier situation where they're just throwing something there for the hell of it. And I don't like that. But the bridge that is still open is actually the Manhattan Bridge, and that's the bridge that's at basically like the tip of the Warlords of New York map. And that one is actually seen in one of the original Division 1 trailers that we're basically kind of like zooming in on, or zooming out of actually. And it's covered in basically just, cars and everything. But I would still like, even if it's just a single, like, literally you can just walk across it, that's it, I would still prefer that. That would be cool if you could actually just walk across it and get to the Brooklyn area. Now, how often am I going to actually just walk across it? I mean, I'm not, but it'll at least make it feel like a cohesive part of the map, right? Like, it's still there. I'm still looking at it from my Warlords of New York map, and that'll make it feel good. But the other thing is, I mean, it's a long bridge. I mean, if we're going to Brooklyn for a reason, there's probably enemies over in Brooklyn or something going on in Brooklyn. And I think it would be really great to actually have like an assault on the bridge. Like we literally have to go from one, like, let's say it's a mission, that could be one of the missions in the, new DLC, where the first mission to get into this DLC is storming across the bridge and, taking out enemies on the way. Maybe we get surrounded by, the Black Tusk hovercraft, and they launch the freaking Marauder drones and, all sorts of little drones at us from the river. And, that could be cool and fun. I mean, it could be a great experience depending on how they did it. And hopefully that's what they're doing. Because, it's kind of been always one of those things where I really like the idea of just fighting along a bridge to try to get to an objective. I think that's really cool. I was hoping they were going to do that with the first raid, when you have to go to the airport. I was hoping that we would be going across the bridge or something like that. Like that would be like an opening sequence to get to the raid. But that never happened. But anyway, yeah, I think it would be just a good, no gimmicks kind of fight where you are literally fighting to get across and fighting to get to the objective. The objective is not just to take out a boss. The objective is to survive and get to the other side. That could be cool. And of course, then that leads a fantastic way into the content over in Brooklyn. Now, hopefully what they're also doing is going to increase the size of Brooklyn. Because if you are familiar with Division 1, the starting area was a good starting area, but it was pretty small. I mean, if you go back to it now and look around and just explore it, there's not much there. And of course, it was a starting area, so they didn't really include any, like, repeatable content or, repeatable missions or anything. Once you do the actual mission there, you're done. That's it. And it was entirely designed for that feature. But if we look at what the Division originally intended, which was kind of like a dark zone down there, it was surrounded by stuff. It was, there was plenty of things popping off on their little infographic map that they had. But that could be really great if they actually added a bunch of stuff there. And if they continued to add a bunch of stuff there. And if they continued to expand, just the New York map itself, or maybe even the Washington, D.C. map in future updates. Who knows? I just think it's a great opportunity for the game to finally give what players have been asking for. And, the mistake that I think the developers are making constantly is that they say, they hear that players want more story, more missions, more content, and that kind of stuff. And what do they end up giving us? Well, they give us something that is their vision of what they want to do. And that sounds about as vague as I hope it does. Because, they pump out a thing to do that is devoid of life from the actual game. And they give it some sort of mediocre storyline that is basically just designed just to, have some detail to give a reason why it exists, like Summit, like what is the point of Summit? I still don't think any of us really knows. There's some vague like story. Oh, we need to go there and clear out enemies, but that's like that's the extent of it. It's pathetic. All right, Countdown has a little bit more story tied to it, and that's great. But again, at the end of the day, a tiny, almost insignificant amount of detail. And this is what we see with a lot of them, like Underground, Survival story was pretty stupid. And, we constantly see this where the story is disconnected from the content that they offer. The content that they offer is usually just like a one and done kind of thing, or it's a mode. And at the heart of it, when, players are asking for stuff, they're not asking for this disjointed stuff that they're giving us. They're not asking for this crap. Players want map expansions. Players want Warlords of New York content. Why did Warlords of New York content do well? Because it gave players everything they were asking for. More story, more content, more missions, more stuff to do, more secrets to find. Like, it was a whole package. And that's the thing that they seem to be like the most resistant to do in this game for no reason. And it makes me mad. This game could have so much freaking content in it. Why is it that they just never want to do it? Why do they never want to support this game? Why do they want to like just relegate the stuff that they add to the game in the form of like just garbage content or throwaway content? Why do they do this? Why can't they take a model that works for a lot of other games? Pretty much every game that's live service does something that is meaningful. Like, you may not like Destiny, but when they add something new to the game, it's usually something new and interesting in the game. When they add, content in World of Warcraft, yeah, like you may not like World of Warcraft, but the people that do, they love the raids and the dungeons and all this stuff. Now, of course, the newer World of Warcraft content may not be up to par, okay. But the first couple years of World of Warcraft were definitely some really great content expansions. And people played the crap out of it. And that's why, World of Warcraft had such a huge in-game population, because it added great content. And this is the same thing with pretty much any MMO that wants to be successful. You can't have an MMO or a live service game and then throw in modes or throw in, like a new item every year and be like, well, that's our content. That doesn't work. And I understand that they don't have a subscription model to be like, well, we don't have a subscription, so we're not like getting massive amounts of money. Well, if you were putting out content and people were buying it and you actually, kept a good reputation with your name, then people would give you money for the content that you add to the game. Like, it's that simple. If you make a good game with a good product for sale, people are going to buy the product. So this is one of the things where I think they really need to turn around their developer design strategies, because what they've done so far, what they've, continued to do throughout the history of the division has not been what I would call successful. And while the game may be good enough monetarily for Ubisoft to keep it alive, or good enough monetarily for, developers to put out some mediocre content on a regular basis, it's not going to ever be a superstar unless they actually invest in the game. It's not going to be a superstar unless they really put some content worth doing over and over and over and over again. They need to keep at this. This is kind of like, the level of content that I would expect year after year after year. I mean, by this time, a good developing studio should have already had 3 or 4 Warlords of New York style expansions for their game. Like, this should have been content that was constantly put out year after year. And look, while I don't know necessarily if they have some sort of huge server-side issues with their content, like, well, we can't really make too much content very often, otherwise the servers will explode. I mean, if that's the standpoint, they really need to get off this crap. They need to get off of freaking their Snowdrop engine, because if this is all the game can support, it's garbage. And they need to stop making this kind of model of game, because it doesn't support it, right? It doesn't support the game that it is. It doesn't support how the game should be. So, yeah, I can understand. If they can't do it because they can't do it, okay, they should have figured that stuff out during the first game and just not released this game on Snowdrop. If they can and they're just not, they need to stop being lazy. They need to actually realize that to keep their jobs, they need to have content that actually is meaningful and good. I mean, look, if they release whatever games in the future and players are just like, oh my god, it's massive, I know what kind of products they push out, I don't have any interest in this, it's going to hurt them down the line anyway, right? You know, if they develop a reputation for just abandoning games and not supporting games and not releasing content that's good, releasing half-baked games at launch, like, no one's going to trust them anymore. And this is what we see with so many games out now. I mean, look, who's going to touch another game from the Harry Potter Hogwarts Legacy creators? I mean, that game was a mess. It was okay, but it was a mess. I mean, maybe Cyberpunk has, you know, a fan base, but at the same time, I think they've destroyed a lot of the faith that the community had. Is CD Projekt Red going to really, like, regain their reputation very soon? No. I think it's going to hurt whatever next game they have that comes out. It's going to hurt the sales because people are going to be like, I don't trust them. And this is how we see Massive. I don't trust them, and I really see that, you know, a lot of the community doesn't trust them either. So look, my main concerns with this is just that their DLC that they're adding with this map expansion, I mean, my biggest worry is not going to be connected to the actual maps. It's going to be its own little, you know, disjointed third part that we have to, you know, activate by selecting it on the main map kind of thing. And while it's not like a terrible thing, it's not great. You know, I would much rather have a world that's connected all in one, right? That's kind of how I would like the Division to be, or prefer. I mean, yeah, having like, you know, two areas with, you know, New York and DC, that's not terrible. But of course, you know, once you start like, you know, just like subbing it out even more, now there's the Manhattan area, and then there's the Brooklyn area, and then there's the DC area. That would be terrible. So hopefully they figure out just how they're going to work this. Hopefully there's a pathway across the Manhattan Bridge that can actually get us there, even if we don't use it all the time, or even if it's just dedicated to like the opening mission of the game. And that kind of, you know, opens it up, and then you can fast travel if you want, or you could walk across it kind of like how you do with the Roosevelt Island. I know it's not necessarily a bridge, but you know, it's you know, kind of sunken down and crashed into that island. So like you can actually still walk across the part of the bridge that's left and get to the island. That would be okay. I wouldn't mind that. I mean, not that I normally walk across that area anyway, but I fast travel to it. But it would just be nice that it's connected. But again, hopefully this map expansion, which again, I assume and I believe is going to be in Brooklyn, hopefully it's not the size of the Brooklyn from the launch of Division 1. Hopefully it's not the Division 1 starting area. Now, I mean, I would like if it was actually kind of, you know, paid homage to that. You know, they didn't update it for like, let's say 2019 or whatever, when, you know, they were doing their like site surveys and stuff like that. Hopefully it stays true to like the Division 1 area. It would be cool if it had snow. It would be cool if there was like actually like weather there, besides just the green. I don't like the green. It doesn't fit for me very well. But hopefully it would have like, you know, more scars and more damage. But like, I would hope that, obviously, because the Division occurred at a specific date, and a lot of the stuff that you saw in, you know, like Washington, D.C., that kind of stuff, I think that was updated more for when they went there in like 2019, so after the game came out. But if they, you know, added this content for Brooklyn and they just kind of went off of like, let's say 2022 mapping and stuff like that, I'd be a little bit disappointed, because it kind of wouldn't really fit in very well with the actual, you know, relevance of the game being from, you know, like this whole disaster kind of happened in 2016 thing. So that's kind of like one minor part. But again, the size, the scope of it, I really hope it's much bigger than what we got for a starting area. Because look, the starting area, while it was just intended for a starting area, was exactly that. It was a starting area. And it was roughly the size of like one district from, you know, any of the other areas of the game. You know, like Warlords of New York has like 4 districts. And if you would probably try to cut off that Brooklyn area from Division 1 and put it into any other district in the game, it would be a much smaller, much more compact area. It would probably be like half the size of the other districts. And that's not really what I think I would want. I mean, I would like something that's probably about 2 districts at least. You know, like, you know, I don't expect a huge WONY size map increase. But having like half the size of WONY in the map, maybe not all the additions that WONY brought, but at least half the size in terms of like map area, I think that would be great. Having a bunch of new missions, that would be great. Having a bunch of things to discover and do there, again, that would be also great. And if that's not the direction they're going, and this is just kind of like, I don't know, like a check in the box filler content, like, oh look, we added some more map size so people can stop crying, and then never even, like never touch it, that would be a huge mistake in my opinion. But honestly, you never know what's going to happen. Maybe, this is, again, still like a year off. So who knows? Maybe the developers see what people are saying, see what people are hoping for. Maybe, heck, maybe even the developers see this video and, they're kind of thinking, well, hey, maybe Cowboy's right. Yeah, obviously that's, usually I think they don't, I don't think they watch my videos. I think they've seen a few of them. But of course, I'm not really like the most supportive of their decisions. So I'm pretty sure they don't normally like to check out my channel or my videos if they even see them. But at the end of the day, I don't care. If the content is good, I don't care. If they put in effort and make good content, that is fantastic. They don't need me to tell them what to do, and they probably don't listen to most of the player base anyway. But, if they do happen to be looking and, seeing what the community is saying, I hope they take away some things that I'm talking about. I hope they really consider what they're doing with the game, what players actually want. Because, look, it's at the end of the day, it's not what they generally provide. That's not what players really engage with. And they already know that one of the best pieces of content that they've ever had in the Division period was Warlords of New York. So if that's not a clue to tell them what they need to do, I don't really know what is. I don't think they're going to listen to anyone else anyway. But again, that's just my take on it. Hopefully it is Brooklyn, because I'd love to go back there. I would love to see some kind of like homage to Division 1 there. I would love to actually like have them redo the starting mission in that area and kind of, like retaking that police station or whatever. I would like them to reuse the entrance. If you didn't really remember, the entrance for the underground was originally a tunnel there in Brooklyn. And, just them adding something like that, I think it would be really cool. I think it would give a lot of Division 1 fans, some hope for the franchise. I think it would be, really cool way to introduce that stuff, back into the only Division 2 crowd. It would just be cool. But, that's all I got for this video, guys. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.